Next up, we're going to be discussing strategies to successfully scale your organization. And I'm lucky to be joined by Livia Benisty. A little intro about Livia. So she is both the company head of AML and general manager over at Banking Circle's UK branch. Having had practical experience working in tier 1 banks, fintech startups, and more recently regtech companies, she spent the last 2 years scaling a financial crime team to support a business that is effectively growing at what I understand is a very quick speed at this point. So Livia, I'm going to jump in with a few questions for you, starting with number one. Actually, first and foremost, hi, Livia. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Hi, Claudia. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So question number one, what are some of the challenges you face as you're looking to scale your organization?
Yeah, I thank you for the ability to talk about this topic as well. I think when I'm asked to do webinars, sometimes it's about pieces of regulation and things like that, which of course we can talk to, but sometimes I suddenly realize actually that's not the largest part of my job anymore, which is strange. But has been a lot of fun to kind of, I think I put the LinkedIn post today about the webinars to flex a different muscle. And I think 15 years in AML and suddenly having to kind of manage managers and scale a team like that, it is a very different skill set. And it's not something you're taught when you're becoming an AML advisory specialist. And definitely the biggest questions for me were, firstly, how do I do this? And secondly, what do I tackle in what order? Yeah. And then thirdly, what's the bigger picture, right? Because you can build a team that works from an AML perspective, from all of your experience, but actually it has to sit within the context of a wider organization. It has to work for that organization. So what are you trying to achieve? Who else are you interacting with, your stakeholders, et cetera, and making sure that it operates in that context and not in a vacuum. And I think that the challenge was figuring all of that out. And what I learned throughout doing it and didn't always get right the first time was that you should start with the people and then go to the processes and then go to the tech. And I think that can be considered maybe a little bit, not controversial, it's too strong a word, but especially in startup and scale up mode in the fintech world with regtech companies all over the place. There's a good solution for almost everything at the moment. I think people think that regtech will solve all the problems. And if you can implement all of that straight away, then you're good to go. Actually, you can't do that because you can't automate that process. So you really have to start with the people. That was my number one lesson, was I should have hired sooner. And I should have hired, well, not better actually, because I managed to get a great team together, but I should have done that sooner. And your people are the absolute core of what you're doing. At that point, they can bring in their experience to develop great processes, and completely echoing what Stephanie was saying just now about how good procedures and policies make an impact on what that looks like. And then you automate, then you put the tech on top once there's a good underlying procedure. So I think the challenge was figuring out how, and that's kind of what I came to in the end.
I think that's incredibly insightful. And you mentioned hiring a really phenomenal team underneath you at that time. So curious to hear, kind of leading into my next questions around what were some of the skills or some of the even the soft skills that you were looking at when going through the hiring process with your AML compliance professionals?
I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head right there. A lot of it is soft skills.
Okay.
A lot more of it is soft skills actually than quite a few others. I mean, it depends what kind of vacuum and what gap you have in your team. You obviously need regulatory specialists, and you, depending on where you are, if you're second line, first line, etc., you will need operational professionals. You'll need the skills that fit the right job. But two things that are fundamentally important. I think soft skills were already coming into play when I started 15, 16 years ago, right? So already the people that could have a conversation and be more social and commercial were beginning to take the lead from the traditional compliance officer, who I think was seen as sitting in a back room in the dark and was maybe brought out for the regulator and then wheeled back to their underground cupboard. So the soft skills and the ability to communicate are key, and I think that's been around for a while. But the breadth of stakeholders that a compliance officer or an AML officer right now has to engage with, I think, is a lot broader than ever before. And the level of expertise and the nature of the language that they have to use in those conversations, I think, has changed a lot. And the biggest area of that is probably tech. I think it's broader because in fintech, you're so much more involved in so many different parts. I worked for very large tier ones, and the largest tier ones in the world. And I had amazing exposure to the business, but I certainly wouldn't have spoken to somebody in tech or product or possibly even actually risk, right? Like it was very different. At the time when I started AML, I wouldn't even have spoken to fraud. We were so distinct. And now in the kind of organizations that I'm in now, you're talking daily to pretty much everybody that I just mentioned, but specifically tech for obvious reasons, right? So the kind of skills that I have been looking at and that I do continue to look at for at least a proportion of my team are tech skills, both in terms of ability to code, right? Like I just hired someone who has SQL and Python skills because it was absolutely essential. I needed someone that could help me assess business requirement docs, do testing, go and run queries. I needed that specific skill set in an AML team, but also the ability to talk to engineers, to win them over, to be their friend. And it is a very different skill set, a very different personality type, often, not to want to generalize, but often it is. And knowing how to handle that is absolutely essential. And that's probably been what's driven the team forward the most in the last couple of years.
That's awesome. I have kind of a sidebar question that's not listed here on the screen, but it'll kind of dovetail into the third one. Right now, we all kind of are aware that it's pretty much a candidate's market out there in terms of hiring and being able to find talent. And that kind of brings me into the next question, which is, how do you kind of strike a balance between being able to find the right candidate that's a fit for you, and just, realistically, I'm seeing this myself working with a lot of really fast growing fintech companies, startup companies that also just need bodies and need people in the door. So my question to you is, how do you kind of balance the process of finding the right candidate and also making sure that you are moving quickly when you are confident that you have found the right candidate?
It's a great question. Hiring right now is impossible. It's so hard. It's so hard. So I think what I would say is you split your needs, right? You have your need to scale and you need to do it quickly and you need to get bodies in the door. And you also have your need for specialists. So realize where you need one. I'm sorry, I'm just going to move a bit because of the light. Realize where you need one versus another. And sometimes you need bodies, but sometimes you need specialists. And don't get the two confused so that you don't hire in a panic where what you really need is a rock star. You don't need a team of alphas. You definitely don't need a team of alphas, but you also don't actually need a team of superstars. You don't need everyone to be like, I want to be CEO in 6 months. In fact, that's going to kill you. Don't do that. It will be a horrible experience to manage. But you do need the few that want to develop super quickly and take on absolutely everything and will excel at everything. And you need people that are really happy doing their job, really enjoy it, do it well, and are happy to stay there for the foreseeable. Recognize what you need in each position is the first thing and hire that accordingly. Don't hire out of panic at all. It doesn't work. And it's a false economy. And when I say that, what I mean is, and this is every position, if you hire because you need someone in the role and it's not the right person, they will leave or you will have a very bad experience managing that person and you won't get what you want. So what you'll find is you invest time and money, and time is the key thing, in training them up, in getting them happy, and understanding how to manage them, understanding what makes them tick and motivating them. And you'll never be able to actually do that successfully because it's the wrong person. They'll leave or you'll have to manage that situation and you're back at the beginning 6 months, 7 months later, potentially with damage having been done. Do not hire in a panic. Find the right people always. And for me, sometimes in the first few years, the right people was telling them just how hard this was going to be and how hard it is and how much needs fixing, and waiting to see if they had that glint in their eye that they were a bit of a masochist and they were kind of up for it. And I was like, okay, that's my guy. Like, that's my girl. That's my person. I want that one. Exactly. And it's worked out pretty well.
Awesome. Perfect. I think I actually do have enough time to squeeze in one last question here. Cool. I'll go with kind of the fourth bullet point in terms of how does technology support a compliance program?
So I think it's a pretty simple answer, to be honest. Compliance and AML is, like everything at the moment, is very much about data. It's about gathering it. It's about entering it to where it needs to be, and it's about analyzing it. So technology does two things. It automates the things that you can't be bothered to do, which is predominantly the gathering and the entering. Like, I don't need to pay current market prices for somebody to be, taking in data from one place and moving it to another. You can get that. You can get a machine to do that. It can be automated. So the first thing is to get rid of the basic boring stuff, so that your rock stars can focus on what they want to do and be motivated in their job daily. But the second thing is the analysis. And you definitely need humans to be able to conduct that analysis, and that's what makes the job more interesting. But a lot of that analysis with huge amounts of data can't be done by humans. And so I would say that tech at the moment for a compliance team are those two things: automating what should be done by a machine, which is gathering and entering data, and then a huge sway of the analysis, which is being done on data which is way too big for any human to manage. And in many ways, that's really the crux of what technology is doing for compliance right now.